Dziękuję van Margin. Ist mich drolling. Und what's a gama? Hi friends, it's the Wren back again. Good morning. I wanted to talk to you guys today about something near and dear to me. And that's the Irish language. Nwelga. Oh, that's good tea. So I read something this morning that I wanted to share with you. And it got my brain thinking, ticking, working. About how important it is for us to learn our native language, our mother tongue. So much can be connected to it. It doesn't have to be connected to it. And in the end, when you focus on it, it's just the language. But it's very important because the language can define culture. A culture is defined by its language. But aside from all these trappings, what I read was this. And this deals with how our language was taken from us. Parents cooperated with schools and the school authorities and priests to compel them, the children, to learn English. They, the children, were sent outside the door, or they were confined to a bedroom while any neighbor or friend was visiting the house that spoke Nwelga, so that they didn't hear the language being used. So our language... Come, let's go. Our language was constantly under threat and being stamped out. I kind of covered this with a video that I did a while back called, what does it mean to be Irish, or who is Irish? And I talked about the language in that video. And I've talked about the language a couple times now. I also talked about the language and the customs dealing with history in my video of the famine. But if you look at the different time periods, there's a map that I believe that somebody created online that shows jumps in years with how our language shrank pre-famine, after the famine, and how it got pushed to these, regions that we now call the Gaeltacht. There's no way Ireland's ever going to recover. Our only hope is that the language grows, survives, and thrives on a global scale. And that's where it's very important that people, across the pond, people here in the stateside, people in Australia, and other countries as well, not just within Ireland, place value on the language and not see it as this thing that's stuck in ancient history. It's a language that's still growing and still modernizing by adapting new words and using new words. And while I can't claim to be any means proficient or nowhere near fluent, everybody starts somewhere. And you just start. You just start using it. You start learning as much as you can. You start adding words to your vocabulary. You start passing it to your children. You read them stories. You look words up. You start a language like you would a child. And then you involve your children when you do it. Now, reading that to you about one of the ways, parents cooperated with the English system, with the Catholic system, on how to take the language away from the people. This goes back much further than just this time period. And I'm going to read you something else. I read this once before in another video, but I'd like to read this again and continue reading a few paragraphs from this. All right. A program was set up to stamp out all traces of the Brehon system. It was commenced according to the Master of Court of Wards, Sir William Parsons. We must change there, the Irish, course of government, apparel, manner of holding land, language, and habit of life. It will otherwise be impossible to set up in them obedience to the laws to the English Empire. By the end of the 17th century, the Brehon system had almost been erased. By the end of the 18th century, and certainly early 19th century, the general population in Ireland had become unaware that a written native law system had ever existed. Yet law manuscripts were preserved in spite of the punishments and persecutions of those found hiding them. Dr. W.K. O'Sullivan, who edited and wrote the introduction to Eugene O'Curry's On the Manners of Customs of Ancient Irish, 1873, stated, during the first part of the 18th century, the possession of an Irish book made the owner a suspect person, and was often the cause of his ruin. In some parts of the country, the tradition of the danger incurred by having Irish manuscripts lived down to within my own memory, and I have seen Irish manuscripts which had been buried until the writing had almost faded, and the margins rotted away, to avoid the danger their discovery would entail at the visiting of the local yeomanry. But the Irish books and manuscripts did survive in spite of the systemic burnings, burials, and drownings. Ironically, many law books lay forgotten in public libraries and in private collections owned by the Anglo-Irish aristocracy. Charles Graves, 1812 to 1899, the grandfather of the famous poet Robert Graves, began a study of the Irish law system. Graves was a Dubliner, a graduate of Trinity College, and professor of mathematics, who became an Anglican bishop at Limerick. An expert on Ogham, he also became president of the Royal Irish Academy in 1860, and it was February 1852 that Graves petitioned the London government to establish a commission to edit and translate the Brehon laws. He was supported in this by James Henthorne Todd, the founder of the Irish Archaeological Society and Regius Professor of Hebrew at Trinity. Surprisingly, the government of the day appointed a royal commission on 11th November 1852 to direct and superintend and carry out into effect the transcription, translation, and publication of the ancient laws and institutes of Ireland. 6 volumes were published between 1865 and 1901. And this goes on and on. This was taken from an excerpt of Peter Beresford Ellis in his book, The Druids. It is a fantastic book. It is not full of any wishy-washy neo-pagan rubbish, as you can tell. And this is the point I'm making here about our language. No matter what time period it seems that our language was being taken from us, it was not just the language that was being taken from us. It was our language. It was our stories. It was our custom of dress. It was our dances. And it was our laws. Now these laws, these Brehon laws, no doubt written down, survived much earlier before they were written down. These laws, no doubt, could be traced at least 1,000 years in some form or another prior to them being written down. And no doubt they can be linked to a Celtic root that shares a cross-cultural thing with many of the laws that were out of India. And that book that I just mentioned talks about that more in depth. So when they were taking our language away from us, they took so much more than just the language. You know, they talk about people that are fluent, that grow up bilingual, that understand languages differently. They kind of, I don't have experience in this, but they say that, you know, they think differently in different languages. They see the world differently through, you know, being brought up since birth, knowing two different languages. I don't know if that's true or not. I would like to believe that it is. But yeah, our music, our dances, our stories, the entire culture, which did encapsulate, you know, the law system. These laws, they're inspiring. They separated us from Roman laws. There was a time period when these laws were in place that protected the handicapped. They protected the mother, the children. They gave the people a voice within their community. Albeit at a time period where in ancient Rome, the handicapped, the elderly, children, women had no say. But our ancestors had laws in place that protected them, that gave the people a voice. So we're savages, we're barbarians. We didn't write things down at certain time periods. We didn't build massive things from stone. You know, the victors tell the histories. And in our case, well, we had to deal with the British Empire. So our history books, written, influenced by the British, the Irish always takes a back seat, you know, especially the culture and its language. It was forced into extinction. It's up to us today to take what we have left, for people that are super passionate about the language, to go to school for the language, to learn Old Irish, and to continue to transcribe and what do they call that? When you lost for words here. When you study Old Irish, when you bring the manuscripts back to life, you bring them into modern Irish, you bring them into English so we can read them too. The language needs to grow and survive, and the only way it's going to do so is if we start using it. You see these videos on YouTube of the younger generation doing modern pop culture songs, and that's a great way to let the language grow and breathe as you pass it on. They will make it relevant for themselves in their culture and in their time. They will put it into the songs that they like. They will put it into the stories that they tell each other. They will put it into the TV shows that they like. But you have to keep passing it down. We have to look back to our history. We learn and grow when we look backwards. We stay firmly rooted in the present while we learn the lessons from the history, all the while that we stay vigilant and steadfast, firm and resolute when we look towards the future, in us being proactive and how we pass this language down. It's important. It's emotional. You don't have to know every word of a song being sung in the native language for it to move you. You can feel it. When you feel it, you know that's important enough for you to invest the time to start learning it. And on that, I'm wishing you well. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And I'll be back again soon. Slangafol.